Okay, so you're thinking about maybe reading The Outsiders,
Hmm.
but you're not really sure if it's worth the time?
Yeah, I get that.
I mean, everyone's always busy, right?
Absolutely.
Well, we did a deep dive into a professional review of The Outsiders and some notes for like a book review video on it.
Okay.
And we'll help you decide if The Outsiders is something you should actually spend your time on.
All right, so right off the bat, I gotta say, the reviewer gave it 3.5 stars out of 5.
Hmm.
It's good, but not like a total must-read.
3.5.
Yeah.
Okay, I think our listeners are probably wondering the same thing I am right now. The Outsiders, like, super famous.
Yeah.
So why only 3.5 stars? What's holding it back?
Well, I think one thing that might trip some people up is the writing style. You
Oh,
gotta remember, S.E. Hinton was like 16 when she wrote this.
wow. Okay.
And it shows sometimes,
Really?
yeah, there are a ton of physical descriptions, like pages and pages just about how good looking each character is, which can get kind of old,
Right.
especially compared to like YA novels that are being written today.
Yeah, I mean, I always find myself, like, more interested in what the characters are thinking and feeling,
Yeah,
not so much what they look like.
totally.
So I could see how that wouldn't work for everyone.
Exactly. And there's also a bunch of emotional scenes,
Okay.
like a lot of crying,
Hmm.
which I guess could seem over the top for some people.
Yeah, I get that.
In fact, the reviewer actually compared one of the characters' descriptions to that super famous fan fiction,
Oh, yeah.
My Immortal, which is, like known for being really melodramatic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a pretty wild comparison.
Yeah.
So is it just style over substance then?
No, not necessarily.
Well,
I mean, the reviewer actually acknowledged that even though the writing can be a little,
yeah.
clunky,
Mm-hmm.
the story is actually super powerful. And The Outsiders looks at things like class conflict and friendship and family in a way that still really connects with people, even though it was written, so long ago.
Right. I see that. So, okay, so it sounds like it's got some real depth to it,
Uh-huh.
but how does that writing style actually affect, like, what it's like to read the book?
Right.
Can you give us an example?
Sure, yeah. So there's the scene
Right.
where the greasers, who are about to have this huge rumble with the socks, they suddenly start doing gymnastics.
Gymnastics.
Yeah, like full-on cartwheels and backflips.
Wow.
Yeah, and it just feels so out of place.
I can see that.
It's like tonally inconsistent with how serious everything's supposed to be.
Yeah, before a fight.
Right?
That's pretty jarring.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're dealing with a book that's got these strong themes,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of emotional depth,
Yeah.
but the writing can feel a little dated,
Yeah.
maybe even tonally inconsistent in places.
Right, exactly.
I think our listeners are starting to get the picture here.
I think so too.
So to kind of understand the appeal of The Outsiders,
Mm-hmm.
I think it makes sense to look at it alongside other coming-of-age stories that have some of those same themes,
Definitely.
right?
Yeah, the reviewer actually mentioned Grease,
Oh, okay.
West Side Story, even A Bronx Tale.
Wow.
They all look at these social divides
Mm-hmm.
and what it's like to grow up when the world feels kind of unfair.
I see the connection now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are all such classic stories. They
Yeah.
stuck with people for, like, generations.
Right.
But so what is it about The Outsiders that makes it different?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think it's how raw the storytelling is. It's like Hinton really gets the voice of this teenage boy
Yeah.
who's just trying to figure things out.
Yeah.
And Ponyboy, he's our narrator. He's sensitive, he's introspective, he
Yeah.
loves like watching sunsets and thinking about the big questions in life, which isn't really what you'd expect from like a stereotypical tough guy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of refreshing
Yeah.
that he's not just like a one-dimensional character.
Yeah, exactly.
What about the other characters though? Are
Really?
they just as well developed?
Definitely. Yeah, you've got Ponyboy's brothers,
Okay.
Dairy and Soda Pop.
Yeah.
And they represent these two different sides of what it means to be masculine
Hmm.
and responsible.
Yeah.
Dairy is like the tough, strict older brother,
Right.
and
Ye-
Soda Pop's the one who's always trying to keep the peace.
Yeah.
It's a really classic sibling dynamic,
Totally.
and I think a lot of readers can relate to that.
For sure. Those family dynamics, they can be really tough, especially when you're a teenager.
Absolutely.
It sounds like Hinton really understands that though.
She does. And then you have Johnny, who's kind of timid and vulnerable,
Okay.
and Dally, who's this tough guy with a secret soft spot. They're these archetypes you see in a lot of stories.
Yeah.
And that's part of why they connect with people so strongly.
Okay, yeah. I'm starting to get why this has become such a classic,
Uh-huh.
even though it's got, its problems.
Right.
But I am curious about those comparisons to, like, Grease and West Side Story.
Sure.
Do they really dig into the same complicated stuff as The Outsiders?
Okay, that's a great question, and I think it's something we should definitely look into more deeply.
Yeah.
While they do all deal with similar themes,
Mm-hmm.
they each go about it in different ways. So, like, Grease, for example, is much lighter,
Yeah.
more comedic,
Right.
whereas West Side Story tackles racial prejudice and violence, more directly, but maybe through a more romantic lens.
Mm-hmm.
So I think The Outsiders kind of sits between those two extremes.
Okay.
It shows this gritty and realistic picture of what it was like to be a teenager back then,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't shy away from the darker stuff.
I can see how that would make it a more interesting and thought-provoking read.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's something our listeners should really keep in mind
Okay.
when they're trying to decide if The Outsider is right for them,
Mm-hmm.
because it's definitely a story that sticks with you.
Yeah.
But it's important to know about its limitations
Right.
and how those limitations might affect the experience of reading it.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not just about whether you think you'll enjoy the story or not.
Uh-huh.
It's about how it might challenge how you see things.
Right.
Make you think in new ways.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Mm-hmm. And speaking of limitations, there are a couple things in The Outsiders that might make some readers cringe a little.
Oh, okay. Like what?
Well, for example, Ponyboy and Johnny, they idolize the Southern gentleman from Gone with the Wind,
Okay.
which, given, some of the racial dynamics in that book,
Right.
it can feel a little tone deaf today.
Yeah, that's true. I guess it is a reminder that even the classics we love are products of their time. And sometimes those views haven't aged very well.
Right, exactly. And there's also some descriptions and dialogue that could be seen as racially insensitive, especially towards Native Americans.
Really?
Yeah, and it's interesting. The reviewer actually mentioned that the recent Broadway adaptation,
Oh, right.
they cast a Native American actor as Johnny,
Wow.
which totally changes the dynamic.
Yeah, that is fascinating.
Yeah.
Just goes to show you how you can reinterpret an old story and find new meaning in it.
Exactly.
The reviewer also mentioned some other books. Besides the big musicals,
Right.
were any of those, like, a little more modern?
Yeah, they did. They suggested Full Tilt, and then there were none if you want something with a similar feel,
Okay.
but a little more contemporary.
Okay, so even if The Outsiders isn't really your thing, there are other options out there. But, even with all its issues, there's something about The Outsiders that keeps drawing people back in.
Yeah.
What do you think that is?
I think it's that really honest and raw look at what it's like to be a teenager.
Okay.
Hinton captures how strong those emotions are.
Yeah.
Feeling like you're an outsider, that fierce loyalty you have to your friends and family. I mean, that's something everyone experiences,
Yeah.
even if the specifics of when it takes place might feel kind of distant.
You know what? You're right. Even though I haven't read it,
Mm-hmm.
I'm starting to feel connected to some of those themes,
Yeah.
like that need to belong,
Right.
to find your people.
Exactly.
Like, we all kind of crave that, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And The Outsiders explores that in a way that's both heartbreaking and hopeful at the same time.
Mhm.
It reminds us that even when things are tough,
Yeah.
there's still beauty in those connections we have with other people.
Okay, so speaking of connections,
Yeah.
the reviewer mentioned a couple works that are actually referenced in The Outsiders.
They did.
What were those again?
So Ponyboy reads Great Expectations.
Huh?
And he really connects with what it has to say about social class and ambition. And there's also a strong connection to Robert Frost's poem, Nothing Gold Can Stay, which is even quoted in the book.
Okay, so it sounds like Hinton was like weaving in these literary layers to give her story more depth.
Yeah, exactly.
Make it more meaningful.
Hmm.
Do you think it's like super important to understand those references to really appreciate The Outsiders?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think you can definitely enjoy it without catching every single reference.
Okay.
But exploring those connections can make the reading experience richer, and give it even more layers of meaning.
Right, it's like finding those little Easter eggs.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's kind of like you can choose your own adventure.
Hmm.
You can read it for the story on the surface, or you can dig deeper and really explore those literary connections.
Exactly. And I think that's part of what makes The Outsider such a lasting book.
Hmm.
It offers different ways to connect with it depending on what kind of reader you are.
Yeah, yeah, I like that.
Hmm.
Okay, so I'm almost sold,
Okay.
but there's one thing I still want to know.
Sure.
You mentioned how The Outsiders might not be for every reader.
Right.
Can you be a little more specific about that?
Okay, so if you're the kind of person who likes those fast-paced,
Yeah.
action-packed books with lots of twists and turns,
Okay.
The Outsiders might not be the best choice.
Right.
It's really a character-driven story.
Mhm.
It's all about exploring emotions and relationships.
So it's more about the inner journey
Yeah,
than the stuff that's happening on the outside.
exactly. And if you're someone who's really sensitive to violence or tragedy,
Okay.
there might be parts of The Outsiders that are hard to read
Mhm.
because it really shows the harsh realities of life back then.
Right, so it's not like a sugar-coated version of growing up.
No, definitely not.
Yeah, it's dealing with some real heavy stuff.
Yeah,
Loss and pain and all that.
exactly. So it really comes down to what you like as a reader
Okay.
and what you want to get out of the experience.
Gotcha. So, okay, we've talked about the good stuff
Hmm?
and the not so good stuff
Yeah,
and everything in between,
right.
but I think our listeners are ready for the big question.
Okay.
Is The Outsiders something everyone should read?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
I think it really depends on what you're looking for in a book.
Yep.
The Outsiders gives you this really unique look at a certain time and place.
Mhm.
And the way it explores these universal themes, they still connect with people today,
Yeah.
but it does have its flaws. It's
Yeah.
important to think critically about it and to remember the context it was written in.
I hear you. It's a classic for a reason.
Yeah.
But it's also, a product of its time.
Exactly. And to help our listeners decide,
Yeah.
I want to leave them with a question.
Okay.
Knowing everything we've talked about, does the historical impact of The Outsiders,
Mm-hmm.
how much it influenced YA literature and the conversations it started,
Right.
do those things outweigh its problems?
Wow, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
It's not just about whether you'll personally like the book,
Uh-huh.
but also about its place in the bigger picture.
Exactly. And here's something else to think about.
Okay.
What parts of the story or the characters or the themes, what really sticks with you
Yeah.
and why?
Mm.
Because thinking about that
Mhm.
might actually tell you something about yourself.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
It's like using literature to learn about yourself.
Right. Exactly.
Well, I think we've given our listeners plenty to think about.
I think so too.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into The Outsiders.
It was my pleasure.
And remember, even if you decide The Outsiders isn't for you, there's a whole world of other books out there to explore.
Right. Like Grease and West Side Story and A Bronx Tale.
Yeah, those are all great places to start if you're looking for something with similar themes.
Yeah. And don't forget about that new Broadway adaptation.
Oh, that's right.
If you're into theater, that might be a better way to experience the story.
Yeah, seeing something live can give you a whole new perspective.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, reading and talking about books,
Mm-hmm.
it's all about sharing different points of view
Right.
and understanding the world a little bit better.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on The Outsiders
Yeah.
or any of the other books we mentioned. You can connect with us on social media
Yeah.
or leave a comment on our website.
Absolutely.
Happy reading, everyone.